Things going okay.
All right, we are going to
Thank
get
you.
started. Good evening,
Thank
everyone. It's
you.
great to see you. Let's every time I sign in here, they move the buttons. Okay, let's share the screen and we will zoom in on it, I know. Okay, we are going to tonight look at Parshat Behar. Is that zoomed in enough? Can everyone see?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. This is completely from Rabbi Foreman's book on Vayikra. And for
Wow.
me, this essay redeemed the entire book. I was a little bit not feeling it, but this was such a mind-blowing look at things that it's worth getting the book just for this essay. I
Wow.
mean, not that everything else was bad, but I wasn't feeling it quite as much, and this one really did something for me. I hope it'll do something for you too. So Parshat
Okay.
Behar, as I say every year, has a very special place in our family because not only is it my bar mitzvah parsha, but it is one of Israel's bar mitzvah parshas. I got lucky in the sense that my bar mitzvah fell during a leap year, so I only had Behar and not Bechukotai, which is a much longer, much more difficult parsha to read. Israel got the double whammy, and despite COVID and despite everything being in lockdown, he did a fantastic job learning it. And if you come to shul this week and next week, you'll be able to hear him recreate that magic. Um,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
yeah.
Oh,
So the parsha deals with the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. Shemitah being the 7th year sabbatical year, and Yovel being the 50th year jubilee year.
yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the features that we know of Shemitah and Yovel?
Number seven's important.
Number 7 is certainly important. The 7th year is the Shemitah, and then the Yovel is the
7 times 7.
actually right at there's Shemitah then Yovel, so it's the 50th year, but it's described as 7 times 7 and then the 50th year. So yeah, 7 is very important, and it's also described as Shabbat, right? So there's a very strong connection between Shemitah, Yovel, and Shabbat. What happens during a Shemitah year?
We can't eat fruits from Eretz Yisrael, right?
Okay, so we're not allowed to harvest or work the land in any way. Um, I mean, there's all sorts. I think one year we did a shear on some of the workarounds. But
Yeah.
right,
Uh-huh.
where
Yeah.
it's on the simple level, we're not supposed to eat any fruit or produce from the land of Israel. There's all sorts of workarounds and all sorts of different attitudes and halachic positions around those workarounds. But we have to now be careful. We're a couple years removed from Shemitah, so we have to be careful now of wine that might have been harvested during the Shemitah year, and ensuring that there's no issues or that it was dealt with properly, or some people and some farmers rely on more complicated workarounds which maintain the kedusha, the sanctity of Shemitah, and then you have to treat any produce or in this situation wine very, very carefully. You can't leave any undrunk. You have to finish everything. So anyway, so not supposed, and then during the Shemitah year, we get all sorts of notices about peppers and oranges and clementines and pomelos, and those are tomatoes also are imported from Israel to America. So we get all sorts of notices about that. If we're living in Israel, it's much more complicated um, to be able to deal with how to eat healthy fruits and vegetables during that year. So we've touched upon what happens with the land. What else happens in the Shemitah year?
Forgiveness of debts.
Okay, forgiveness of
Oh, yeah.
debts, right? We all, a couple of years back before at the conclusion of Shemitah, filled out a Prus Bowl to allow for the continuation of collection of debts or that? Any
So
debts
I
we might
filled
have
out
forgotten about?
Jeremy's.
So forgiveness of debts. Anything else?
Reading of the of Avadim Ivrim.
Okay, so Hebrew slave servants are set free, or have the option of being set free. It's, Shemitah year, they have the option. If they don't want to go free during Shemitah, once we get to Yovel, there's no more option. They got to go. And there's one more added feature to the Yovel that's not in Shemitah, which is what?
So something about you can only eat growth directly from the field? What does that mean?
So that's true in both years, meaning in theory, it's not that produce is prohibited, but that the land is sort of becomes ownerless or becomes the property of everyone. So anything that grows on its own is open and available for anyone to come and take. So you, in theory, if you're going on a tiyul, on a hike, you're allowed to take any, come by an apple tree, you can take the apples that you see growing. So we also have the whole issue of return of the lands to the original owner or the original family that owned it, which happens during the Yovel year. Okay, so we have a lot of interesting features about this. We're going to focus specifically on the Yovel, and let's look at source number 1. The Torah tells us, "V'safarta lecha sheva shabtot shanim, sheva shanim, sheva pa'amim." Should count 7 cycles of the Shemitah, 7 years, 7 times. Vayu lecha yemei sheva shabtot hashanim, tesha v'arba'im shana. That brings you to 49. V'havarta shofar t'ruah b'chodesh hashvi'i v'esor lachodesh. V'yom ha'kippurim ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzachem. And then you will sound the shofar throughout the land on Yom Kippur. V'kidashtem et shnata chamishim shana ukratem deror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. And you shall sanctify the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land. Right, the same. The Liberty Bell takes its from this is this pasuk, and proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants. Yovel hi lachem, it shall be a jubilee for you. V'shavtem isha lechuzato, isha mishpachto tashuvu, and each person shall return to their ancestral land and to their family, their clan. Yovel hi shnata chamishim shana tieh lachem. It's a jubilee year, the 50th. You should not plant, you should not do any work in the field. Because it's a jubilee, it's sanctified. You can't eat anything in the field, as Cheryl noted. In this jubilee year, you all return to your original holding. Okay, so that's the Yovel. That's the jubilee year. So here's the connection, and Rabbi Foreman in his book actually credits one of his students, not even, we call it a student, and I guess it's a student in the way that we're all students. He said someone who was listening to one of his podcasts or watching one of his videos sent him an email asking a question. He said it's a question that never occurred to him before, but once he heard the question and he saw there was something very deep to it. He says, as we often do, there seems to be some allusion in this description to something way back in Sefer Breshit. And specifically, what this reader noticed is that the word Yovel, Jubilee, seems to connect to a number of names that we see very, very early in Sefer Breshit. So some of you all have the source sheet, so you might have looked ahead, but does anyone who didn't look ahead, or even if you did, what anyone want to hazard a guess as to what names you might be referring to?
Cain and Abel.
Yes.
Cain and Abel. Who said that?
Okay, no.
Did someone say Cain and Abel?
Yeah, I did.
And it.
And did. Okay. Sort of. bit more obscure than that.
Llama.
You're getting closer. Okay, so let's look in source number 2. We are at the tail end of the story of Cain and Hevel, of Cain and Abel. We all know the basics of the story. The 2 children of Adam and Chava, the 2 original children, offer sacrifices to God. Abel's sacrifices are accepted. Cain's are not. Cain presumably gets jealous, although what exactly happened and why it happened is a whole for a different time. He kills his brother and then is informed that he's going to be severely punished. Okay, and then we read about the aftermath after Cain is punished. We read in source number 2, Breshit chapter 4, beginning in verse 17. Vayeda Cain et ishto, v'tar v'telet et Chanoch, v'yibon ha'ir, v'yikashem ha'ir b'shem beno Chanoch. So Cain has a child with his wife, and they have a child named Chanoch, and Cain builds a city and names the city after his son Chanoch. ויוולד לחנוך את עירד, ועירד ילד את מחיהו, ומחיהו ילד את מתושאל, ומתושאל ילד את למך. Now we go through the genealogy. So after Chanoch, Chanoch has Irad, and Irad has Mechuyael. Mechuyael has Metushael, and Metushael has Lemech. ויקח לו למך שתי נשים, שם האחת עדה ושם השני צילה. Lemech takes 2 wives, Ada and Tzila. ותלד Ada et Yaval, who היה אבי יושב אוהל ומקנה. Ada gives birth to Yaval, who is the father of, or the creator of tents. How does it translate it here? The ancestor of those who dwell in tents amidst herds. V'shem achiv Yuval, who היה אבי כל תופס כינור ועוגב. And the name of his brother was Yuval, who was the father or the founder of anyone who plays on a stringed instrument. I think one year we did a whole shiur in Sefer Breshit on Yuval and the creation of music.
A friend of mine who plays the harp was in a trio for a while, and they called it the Yovel trio.
Oh yeah? Cool. Very cool. V'tzila gam hi yalda et tuval kain lo teshkol choresh nechoshet uvarzel v'achot tuval kain na'ama. And Sila gave birth to Tuval Cain, who was the founder, the inventor of iron tools. And his sister was Naama. Vayomer lemech lenashav adav et Sila shim'ana koli neshe lemech hazina imarti ki ish arakti lepitzi v'yeled lechubarati. Lemech said to his wives, Ada and Sila, hear my voice, O wives of Lemech, give ear to my speech. I have slain a person for wounding me, and a lad for bruising me. So unclear if he killed 1 person or 2 people, but he confesses to committing at least 1 murder, maybe 2. Ki shivatayim yukam Cain v'Lemech shivim v'shiva. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lemech 77-fold. Okay, we're going to unpack this a little bit more. But what are the names that that cued off Rabbi Foreman's students?
What are the names that what?
So the names that prompted Rabbi Foreman's student to ask if there's a connection.
So
Look at the children of Lemech. What are his children's names? The first is named Yaval, which is clearly the same root as Yovel. And then the second is Yuval, which again, very clearly the same roots, right? It's both based on Yud, Bet, Lamed. So there's clearly a linguistic connection between Yovel, the Jubilee year, and these 2 children of Ada, Lemech's first wife. And then with his second wife, the child is Tuval Cain. Tuval is also grammatically very much connected to Yaval, Yuval, and Yovel. Okay, it's like putting it in the future tense and feminized or second person, but it's again grammatically speaking, it's the same verb, even though it's not sounded the same because it's with a taf at the beginning and it's tuval without the yud pronounced, but the yud is very much there. So we have these three children named Yaval, Yuval, and Tuval Kain. So that seems to be connected to Yovel. And the question is, why? What on earth are these children of Lemech sort of thrown into the middle of the genealogy of Cain? Why, how and why are they connected to the Yovel, to the Jubilee? Anyone else? Anyone want to venture a guess, or anyone intrigued?
It's a celebration maybe of being freed from a kind of enslavement,
Okay.
like an indentured servant. You're not exactly enslaved. You have a certain responsibility because you had a big debt that you couldn't pay, for example, and therefore you sell yourself for servitude for a given period of time to pay off the chov, the chiyuv,
So
whichever it
what's
is.
the enslavement that these children are experiencing?
Somebody, well, the children are not experiencing it. It's the descendants of Cain.
What's the enslavement that they're experiencing?
There's a guilt,
Okay.
a blood guilt, call it, for the killing of Hevel
Okay.
by Cain. Cain is their ancestor.
Right.
And so the family is going to be freed by the death of someone who wounded Lemech, so to speak, and a lad who bruised him. The one who wounded Lemech is his ancestor Cain, and Lemech
Interesting.
has killed Cain. As for the lad, is the lad the young person that Cain was relatively when he kills his brother Hevel?
Interesting.
And
So Robert is suggesting that Lemech, in his declaration of murder, is not a literal murder. It's not that he's fessing up to anything that would land him in jail, but he's saying, I found a way to break free of this curse that has been in our family for all these years. Very interesting. That's not at all how Rabbi Foreman takes it, but very interesting
Oh,
suggestion.
wow.
Very, I think there might be something here. I don't know. I don't know, but let's take a step back before we begin to unpack. I think there's one more key passage we have to see, which is the description of the murder of Hevel by Cain. Vayomer Cain el Hevel achi, vayibi otam basadeh, vayakam Cain el Hevel achi, vayahargeu. So again, we have no idea what's really going on here. Cain says to his brother Abel while they were in the field, and he rises up over Abel and he kills him. We don't know what was said between them. There's a lot of missing information. Vayomer Hashem el Cain, E Hevel achicha, vayomer lo yadati ashomer achi anochi. God says to Cain, where is Hevel your brother? And Cain says, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? Or some translate it as, I didn't know I'm my brother's keeper. Why are you asking me? So God says to Cain, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the land. You're going to be cursed from the land which swallowed your brother's blood. When you work the land, it's going to be very difficult. You're going to have to wander the land. Vayomer Cain el Hashem gadol avoni minso. So Cain says to God, this punishment is too great for me to bear. Hein garashta oti hayom me'al pnei adama umipanecha esater v'iti na v'nad va'aretz v'haya kol motzai hargeni. Here's what you've done to me, God. This is my punishment as I see it. You've chased me out of the land. You have hidden your face from me. I have to wander the land, and anyone who finds me will kill me. Vayomer lo Hashem lachein kol hareg Kain shiv'atayim yukam. Vayasem Hashem lekain ot levilti hakot oto kol motzo. So God says, I promise anyone who kills Cain, sevenfold vengeance shall be exacted. And God put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who met him should kill him. So it's a very, very strange interaction here. Number one, why does God offer Cain any protection or any comfort? Cain just committed murder, right? As many like to point out, he literally killed a quarter of the world's population. So why is God offering him any sort of protection?
How can he be convicted of murder if there is a judicial process implied? If Ribono Shel Olam decides that this person shall not continue to exist, that person shall not continue to exist.
So
But letting him exist, it raises a question. Is it a kind of a judicial problem? If you don't have witnesses to a crime,
okay, so that's a
you're
really
left to
interesting
having the soil
question.
testifying.
That's a question that we often grapple with, which is, should we be applying halachic norms to stories that predate the giving of the Torah? Right? So that's a really rich, complicated question. And in this case, right, so murder is not, we can go further back because that's one of the Shiva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. So can we apply those norms pre-Noach? I don't know. So maybe in the absence of formal rules, you're right. No human court can mete out whatever punishment is due to him.
But there are courts. One of the Sheva Mitzvot is to establish courts that will judge cases.
But that's in a few more generations. We're not there yet, right?
Okay.
Right. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe God offers him protection because there are no courts. There is no legal system that could properly carry out whatever he might be deserving of. So that's possible. Another interesting question is, he says that this protection will extend for 7 generations. Sevenfold. Let's go back to source number 2 and look at these children whose names we're focusing on, and let's count generations. Generation number 1 is Cain, right? Cain gives birth to Chanoch, Chanoch to Irad, Irad Mechuyael, Mechuyael Metushael, Metushael Lemech, and Lemech's children, Yaval, Yuval, and Tuval Cain, are the 7th generation. Okay, so we have some interesting connection between 7 and this 7th generation. Not only do the names echo Yovel, which remember our focus is Yovel, but the names seem to also go back in time. Tuval Cain clearly has the name Cain in it. And it's strange why, right? Okay, so they're the ancestors of Cain, but if you know that your ancestor is the first murderer in history of the world, would you want to be named after him? It's like in Forrest Gump. Remember how Forrest Gump gets his name? He's named after like one of the founders of the Ku Klux Klan. So who was one of his relatives. So it's strange that one of these children would be named after Tuval, after Cain, but the names Yuval, Yaval, and Yuval and Tuval also evoke the name Hevel. So they could be grammatically connected to the verb or to the word Yovel with a yud, but it could also be that they're connected to Hevel, which also grammatically can work. Because both
what
the
does
yud,
Hevel mean?
we'll get there. We're going to get
Yeah.
to what Hevel means, right? But we know Hevel from Sefer Kohelet. Hevel Havalim,
Yeah.
vanity of vanities.
Mm.
So Hevel could mean nothingness, or Hevel could mean breath. And
Human life is like a breath.
Yeah, we'll get there in a second.
All right.
Okay. So we have this really interesting connection. We have the names Yaval, Yuval, and Tuval Kayin, which both spring us forward in time to Yovel and point us back to their ancestors, Kayin and Hevel. They appear in the 7th generation. Remember, we're told that that Kayin's protection will last for, or whatever the effects will last for 7 generations. Remember how the Yovel is described. It's not described as just 50 years, but it's described as 7 years, 7 years of 7 cycles, 7 cycles of 7 years, right? We have 7 times 7 times 7. So we have this real, as Anne, right, someone pointed out, I think it was Anne, very strong emphasis on 7. What do these children do? What does Yaval do, the first of the children?
Sounds like he was a shepherd.
Well, he was a shepherd, maybe, but he
He
wasn't a shepherd like all the shepherds before him. He was a
played the
different.
lyre. He was a musician.
No. That's Yuval or Yaval.
Yuva. Yava.
Verse 20.
Yeah.
He lived in tents.
He lived in tents. So that doesn't sound so remarkable to us. But what was Cain's punishment?
To wander.
the earth.
He's going to wander the earth. He's going to have nowhere to go.
Hmm.
So if this is the first shepherd to figure out that he can make and pitch a tent, he's easing somewhat the punishment of Cain. Let's skip to Tuval Cain, verse 22. What does Tuval Cain do?
He makes the instruments, the metal instruments.
He makes metal instruments. So what do metal instruments do?
Well, they allow you to till the earth.
Yeah,
allow
they
you
make
to
a farmer's life a
build.
lot easier. What was Cain's other punishment? Verse 12. Ki tavodet adama lo tosef tet kochalach. When you work the land, it's not going to pay you back in kind. It's going to be very difficult to bring forth anything. And that's why you're going to have to wander. Now we have the introduction of farming tools. And so farming the lands becomes a lot easier. So these children alone seem to be, perhaps, I don't want to say undoing, but minimizing the effects of Cain's punishment. Okay, 7 generations, right? Cain's told this is going to last for 7 generations. 7 generations, and we have some relief. We have something that might be making things a little bit more tolerable, a little bit more possible. And the proof of that might come from the third brother. Because what does the third brother do? What does the third brother invent?
Music.
Music. Music is a luxury item, right? Music is something that you're only able to develop once you're, when you're not constantly worried, when you're not constantly bogged down by the pressures of having to survive. And so we see that there is a seeming lessening of the impact of Cain's punishment. But then comes their father Lamech, and what does Lamech do?
It seems like he started the cycle again and it's worse.
Yeah, he murders, just like Cain murdered, he commits murder. And here, right? We don't have any reason, we might disagree with what Cain did, but Cain, at least we understand the impulse that led to Cain committing murder. We don't know what led Lamech to commit murder. He just comes home one day. He says, guess what I did? I killed 2 people. He kills a child. Not only does he commit murder, he commits murder of a child. And so he seems, as Beatrice says, to be starting this cycle all over again of what Cain, of what happened with Cain. Rabbi Foreman has a really interesting take on this whole protection and what was so horrible about what Cain introduced. He says that, why does God offer Cain protection? He says maybe it's not really protection in the way that we think of protection. We think of protection as that there's some halo around him, that God's providing some supernatural protection for him. He says maybe the protection that God is saying isn't a promise, but a statement of fact. Cain, no one's going to mess with you, because if people mess with you, really bad things happen to them, right? You're going to rule, you're going to have safety because of the fear that you instill in others. Maybe that's what the protection is. Not that there's all murder is bad and all harm of people is bad. But no one's going to mess with you, Cain, because you've instilled fear in them. And if that's the case, then what Lamech does in killing these other people is he instills even more fear, and he continues that over and over again, just as things seem to be getting a little bit better, just as things seem to be a bit of relief. And he focuses again on the music, on the instrument, because what happens? We're told of the inventions of the children, the tent and the music and the farming implements. And after that, Lamech comes home and makes his declaration. Vayomer Lemech lenashav ada v'tzila shimana koli neshed Lemech hazina imarti ki isharati lepitzi vayele lechaburati. The healing is already there, right? The refuah, the healing, the medicine is already there. We already have the easing of. It's one thing if this happens before his children are born, before we're told of them. But specifically, he says, listen to me. If they're listening to him, they're not listening to the music that's being played, right? It's actively canceling out that music to bring this more horrible news back. And to, as Beatrice so beautifully said, to start this cycle over and over again. It goes a little bit even deeper than that. Because when the original cycle began with Cain v'Hevel, what does God say to Cain? He says, Me'asita kol demei achicha tzoakim elai min ha'adama. The voice of your brother's blood is calling out to me. And so Rabbi Foreman says 2 more things here. Says, number 1, that in the invention of the instruments, right, not the wood, the wind instruments, we have a, as it were, sort of resuscitation of Hevel. Hevel, the name means, Robert, you asked, what does the name Hevel mean? So one interpretation is that it means breath. So Hevel's breath, Hevel's literal voice, which was silenced because he was murdered, all that was left was the voice of his blood, is brought back into the world through the musical instruments of Yovel. And the second thing he says is, what happens to the blood? What happens to Hevel's blood? It gets absorbed into the land. And that's why the land isn't giving forth of produce so easily. And so we have, right, so think of, part of the effect of the murder of Hevel. Before the punishment, just the effect is difficulty in bringing forth produce from the land. We have this very interesting idea that the land has become tarnished somehow. So I'm skipping many steps here. Some of it you can tease out if you just by reading the quotes from Rabbi Foreman that I gave you here. But we have, right? Think about what the Yovel is. So number one, the Yovel is a return of freedom, right? An undoing of servitude. So Robert, you started to give a beautiful, beautiful drasha, and I think what you were saying is true. That part of what the Yovel is and part of what the children were doing was breaking free of their servitude to the cycle which began with Cain. And so every 50 years, right, every conclusion of the 7-year cycle, we have this opportunity to sort of start anew, to bring harmony back to the land, which has been tarnished by whatever human interactions there have been, right? Whether it's literally the blood that was absorbed by the land, and to restore things to their natural way, restore things to how the original equilibrium should be, right? Just as the result of the murder is that Cain had to wander and was homeless and had no place, no base. So Yovel comes and says, any land that has been dispossessed from its original owner will be returned. There'll be a restoration of land to its original owner. And so the Yovel really is playing off of this, we'll call it a proto story, right? This pre-story. It's not that Yovel is a direct connection, a direct continuation, but what we experience and what Yovel is all about is very much informed by this origin story that where the name, the word Yovel figures so prominently.
Does Yovel apply? I'm sorry. Does Yovel apply outside of Eretz Yisrael? That is on the land outside Eretz Yisrael?
No.
Then it means that Lemech and the descendants of Cain down to Lemech and Lemech's family, they're all living in Eretz Yisrael?
We don't know. So again, what he's not saying that what's happening with this generation is Yovel, as the Torah describes it in Sefer Vayikra. But he says it's a pre-story to what Yovel is. It gives us origins. It gives us like sort of a prototype of where the idea of Yovel it comes from and what the idea of Yovel is meant to be. So it wasn't a direct correlation between Yovel as the Torah describes in Sefer Vayikra as we would know Yovel or as our ancestors would know Yovel when they were living in Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. It's not an exact, but it's saying it's a prefiguration of it. Beatrice.
I'm wondering if it's upside down in the sense that Yovel is Yovel's restoring, right? It's bringing something back. It's righting something that's gone wrong.
Exactly.
And the Cain story seems to something's wronged that had gone right.
Something's wrong. It starts to go right, but then we go back into the cycle of wrongness.
Right. So it's the other way around.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. We'll come to that point. There's one more awesome
But it was
connection,
manslaughter.
I think.
It was manslaughter. It was not the same thing. It was by mistake, wasn't it?
Different Mefarshim say the Torah doesn't tell us. The Torah doesn't tell us. We don't, I mean, different Mefarshim have different takes on it. But clearly, right, there is a confession of killing someone. Haragti. Right? So,
but he didn't do it intentionally.
Okay, so
I mean, that's pretty clear from the text itself. But maybe I'm wrong. I should go back and look at it.
It could be that he comes home in shame or in shock and he says, you won't believe this horrible thing that happened to me today. Or it could be that he's boasting. Different commentators take it different ways, and the Torah doesn't tell us. But we could say the same thing about Cain, right? Many make the claim that Cain didn't know that he was going to kill his brother by whatever he did to him, right? How could he have known? One more thing. Skip to source number 12. Because what is the hallmark of the Yovel year? V'ha'avarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi b'esor lachodesh. Yovel begins with the sounding of the shofar. What's a shofar? It's the same instrument that Yuval
Same as,
created.
yeah, what Yuval made, yes.
It's the same restoration of the Hevel, of the breath of Hevel. It's the same bringing of music. And so we have this very strong parallel. And one more piece. Again, I hope I'm doing it justice. I hope I'm doing it justice. One more piece is we have the children of Lemech, this seventh generation, Yaval, Yuval, and Tuval Kayin. And what we've suggested so far is that they come along and they offer some corrective, some easing of the ramifications of their ancestor Kayin. The number one tragic description of Kayin, and there's many of them, but I think we would agree is that it was an instance not only, it's hard to say not only, but it was an instance of murder. It was a fit of jealousy or rage or whatever it was. It was also against his brother, right? What the first murder was the murder of a brother. We want to be fancy, we'll call it fracticide. That he killed his brother. And here we have three brothers that seem to exist in perfect harmony with each other. Right? That's a little bit of a play on words because of the musical element, but there's no jealousy among them. And they seem to understand that they can complement each other. Right? They all find different careers. There's no competition. There's no jealousy. The Yovel is a last resort, at least certain elements of the Yovel. The setting free of the slaves, the returning of the land. The Torah tells us in our Parsha, sources number 14 and 15. What happens if someone has to sell themselves into slavery, has to indenture themselves as a servant, in which case they have to rely on the Shemitah or the Yovel to set them free? Well, that's the last resort. But the Torah tells us, Ki amucha chicha machar mechuzato uvago alo akov elav v'ga'al et mimkar achiv. Sorry, this is talking about land. The next one's talking about servants. But if someone becomes so impoverished that they have to sell a part of their land, then vago aloha karovela v'ga'alat mimkar achiv. Then the nearest redeemer should come and redeem what was sold. We don't want to wait for Shemitah or Yovel to restore the land to the original owner. We want a relative, a friend. We want someone to step up and assume responsibility and take care of it for them. Similarly, if someone has to sell themselves, it has to indenture themselves, kitasig yad ger v'toshav imach, umach achicha imo, v'nimkar lager toshav imach, o le'eker mishpachat ger. If someone is forced to sell themselves into some sort of indentured servitude, acharei nimkar geulati alo, echad me'achav yigalenu. After he has been sold, after he comes to this horrible breaking point where the only relief is by selling himself into servitude. So again, one of his brothers should come and redeem him. O dodo, o ben dodo yigalenu, o misher bisaro, mishpachto yigalenu, o isiga yado v'nigal, or an uncle or a cousin or some relative should come and redeem them. And if not, maybe they'll come into their own money and be able to redeem themselves. We're not supposed to wait for the Yovel for this restoration to happen. We're supposed to try to help people before they get to that point of having to serve many, many years as someone's servant. So the last piece Rabbi Foreman says in number 16, the Torah, in innovating the institution of Yovel, asks the society of Israel to resist getting co-opted. Instead, it insists that if individuals won't act in the face of alienation from the land, society will. If individuals won't be their brother's keeper, if they won't redeem the land of their kin, then once every 50 years, society will act collectively to return family land unilaterally to its original owner. And if individuals won't redeem their own kin from slavery, then once every 50 years, society will act collectively to annul the bonds of servitude and return people to their families. Okay, so again, part of the message of Yovel is that we are supposed to undo that, right? Not the extreme of fratricide, of murdering your brother, but to undo the jealousy, undo the not standing up, the not claiming responsibility, Hashomer Achi Anochi. But to declare, yes, I am my brother's keeper, and as such, I will protect them. I will step in and act as the Goel, as the redeemer for them. And so we have this beautiful coming together in the laws of Yovel of a corrective to so much of what went wrong so many generations earlier. My mind was blown. I don't know about your minds, but my mind was blown by all this. And
I'm sorry.
go
Please go
ahead.
on.
No, please.
I was just wondering, recently, President Biden
Mm-hmm.
made a decree that he's allowed to make, apparently under American law, to forgive billions, with a B, billions of dollars of educational debt
Right.
accumulated by hundreds of thousands of individuals. I know of one particular case of a person who graduated from a professional school, and that debt had grown after years and years and years to almost $250,000, and was
Wow.
having all kinds of effects and so on. And suddenly, this person is liberated
Mm-hmm.
and can build a life.
Mhm.
It's just it's an amazing thing. So I would suggest that the granting of forgiveness on those debts is in a way an echo of the idea of Yovel.
Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
certainly is. There's a lot to say about that on both sides of it. I remember when I was working at Brandeis, I think it was the first year we were working there. Graduation weekends coincided with Parshat Behar. And
Mhm.
so I remember my Dvar Torah, I said, all the parents are very much wishing that the university will read the Parsha and decide to forgive all the student debt that's been accumulated these past 4 years. The university didn't read the Parsha or didn't act on that. Yeah, it's on the one hand, we're certainly reading this. It's hard to not be sympathetic to those who are living under tremendous debt and the weight and the pressures that causes. Um, you know, I, there's another side to that as well. I don't think we can say, from Parshat Bahar, we learned that President Biden should automatically forgive all debt, and we should also forgive all debt. Like I think that's not the right lesson, but there is something powerful there.
It's the forgiveness comes up, as I understand it, if the person involved has made a sincere effort to pay
Right.
for at least 20 years.
Yeah.
And if they've done it for 20 years or 49 years, then they
Yeah.
qualify for the special forgiveness clause.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I debated the last source in the packet is how Rabbi Foreman actually introduces the essay, but I thought it would be maybe helpful to put it at the end to kind of bring everything together. So he says that there's two primary genres of material in the Torah or in Chumash, story and law, right? Halacha and Agadah, or however we want to frame it. It would be a mistake to see the two as entirely separate. Hidden links seem to connect many of the Torah's stories to its laws. What do these links tell us? It isn't always easy to know. But broadly speaking, I'd like to suggest that our laws respond to our history. A law may come to rectify a historical wrong. Or, on the other side of the ledger, a law may seek to reenact a high point in our history, ensuring that its legacy continues to influence the life of the nation even after the passage of many centuries. Sometimes it may be a little bit of both. The law may pick up on a hopeful potentiality in a story that was tragically never actualized. And that's what he suggests is going on here, is that in that generation of Lamech's children, we had the potential to undo or to ease or to mitigate or to overcome the effects of Cain's terrible act and the punishment that followed. And it was thrown right back into that vicious cycle by Lamech's actions. And so Yovel is coming to try to show what could have been and try to realize that potentiality that was never actualized at that time. So certainly gave me what to think about on a parsha that, as I said, as my bar mitzvah parsha, is very familiar to me, and a whole different way of thinking about it. There's some other remarkable connections you can tease out by looking at the other sources we didn't look at together, or as I said, after this essay, I highly recommend buying this book, Rabbi Foreman's book on Vayikra, as like all his books, or you can. I'm sure on his website he must have some version of this up on the website as well. I don't know if it's on the free side of the website or the pay side, but anyway, I thought this was quite fascinating. As I said, there's a special treat in Shul this Shabbos as Yisrael will be laning the parsha, and because he got the double parsha and I didn't, it's my bar mitzvah haftarah, which I don't share with him. So I'm going to take the haftarah this week, and we might have some special guests joining us as well. We have a kiddush. We've got a lot going on, so hopefully we'll see everyone in Shul on Shabbos. Next week, there's no parsha shiur. There's the very important congregational meeting. If you can be there in person, that would be ideal. If you can't be there in person, we'll be Zooming it also. Please, please, please make every effort to be there. Very important conversation that has to take place. So with that, I'll wish everyone a good night and hopefully see you on Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yasser
take care.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I know.